Okay, so this is my Lattepanda Alpha in a triple boot configuration running Windows 10, Ubuntu 18, and Mac OS 10.14 Mojave. The bootloader is Clover bootloader, which I have customized just to be specific to me. And you can see here I have Windows, I have Ubuntu, I have the Mac OS, as well as the Mac OS recovery. So first we'll go into Mac OS because that was one of the more difficult installs. And we'll take a look there. So within Mac OS, everything with the exception of the audio output line is working. If you are interested in getting a Mac OS set up, the best tutorial I found, and I won't repeat it here, was Nova Spirit Tech. They did a great job of breaking down how to format a USB drive, which USB drive. Now, one of the things that was interesting that he mentioned was the USB drive. Some of them worked and some of them didn't. If you have an actual Mac system and you open up disk utilities, you could look and see if the actual drive is bootable or not. I have a few drives here, for instance, a Micro Center drive. Pick these up pretty cheap. They're in the front of the store. That drive is it's not capable of being booted, and it'll show you in disk utilities that it's not. The SanDisk Cruisers are, as well as some of the SanDisk Ultras. So definitely worth picking up some SanDisk drives. They seem to be a higher quality and work better. Okay, so just to show you here that we have now here's an interesting thing. So the system clock doesn't pull the data from the BIOS, so you will be making sure that or you will be resetting the clock every so often. Well, every time you boot, you're going to need to reset the clock, and it'll grab the time from Apple servers. We pretty much just need to unlock the settings and then let it kind of do its own update thing. I do have an Asus USB dongle for Wi-Fi, and it's a USB N13. I did install a few Kext for that as well. However, it does the Nova Spirit Tech Clover files. They do include Kext for that, but I did like to load in my Asus Kext. I also have a Asus USB Bluetooth dongle. I found that the wireless antennas that were on the Intel chipset, they work and they're fine, but the Bluetooth doesn't work without having those antennas on there, and my plan is to eventually remove those. So I like to have the little dongle just because it's an easier method for me. But as you can see, the dongle does actually work, and it does pick up nearby devices. So if I was to turn on a Microsoft Wedge keyboard, you see it would grab it, connect, and even allow us to as soon as it connects, it will allow us to not connected. Well, that's boo, isn't it? There we go. Connecting, and yep, Bluetooth is a little quirky on Mac. I did have this set up and going for a little while, and it seems to cut out occasionally. And come on there. There we go. Hopefully that'll do it. 1 5 9 7 0 5. Enter. Okay, perfect. So now we're connected, and it will keep the connection. And just to show you, I tend to like to use a kind of standard old school clunky keyboard. It just allows me to get into the BIOS, not have to worry about whether my keyboard's connected or not, and whether that's causing the issues or not. Same thing, I like to use a little plug-in USB mouse. Just makes things easier. When everything's connected Bluetooth, it doesn't allow me to get into the BIOS or mess around sometimes in some of the preloaded parts of the system. No, we're not going to save that. So we could see here about this Mac. We jump over here. We are running Mac OS Mojave 10.14.2, and it thinks it's a Retina display, 12-inch, early 2006, 1.61 gigahertz Intel Core M3, 8 gigabyte memory, DDR3, and we're using the Intel graphics. And one of the ways you could tell we are using the graphics acceleration, or the GPU, is if you were to actually take a window and bring it down just underneath one of your dock, you should see there that it's slightly transparent. And so when your graphics are enabled and your GPU is working properly, what you'll find is that the opacity will work on there. So we know it's working. We know it's good there. And look at that. Bluetooth just... No, there it is. Wi-Fi's on and working. Works well. Hasn't cut out on me yet. So that would be the Mac setup. Then of course there's Windows 10, and Windows 10 comes pre-installed on the Lattepanda Alpha. It's loaded onto the eMMC drive, which is nice. It means one less system to actually load. And same thing, we'd access that bootloader through Clover. And so we'll wait here for it to restart, which that's one of the interesting things. So when I originally got the Panda and I opened up the box, the RTC battery was dead, and there was a lot of lag in the boot up time. So if that happens to you, the first thing I'd suggest is replacing the RTC battery, or at least running a voltmeter to it, and just checking to make sure you're getting the proper voltage through your battery, and making sure it's charged, and then setting up your BIOS. So your time, turning off a few features like secure boot. For Mac OS to work, you do need to turn off secure boot. The VTD, you do need to turn that off. The GPU settings as well, you need to bump it down from 2 gigabytes to anything less. 1 gigabyte is what I chose, just to give the Mac OS a little bit of a oomph without reaching that limit of 2 gigabytes. And then set, of course, your boot order so that you're booting from your Clover bootloader first, instead of from the eMMC's Windows bootloader, or any of the other ones you install afterwards. And every now and then I find when I try to restart, the system does actually hang, and I haven't figured out whether that's me with a setting, or if that is the alpha doing its thing. Now, even before I did all this funky installation and everything, one of the issues I ran into was restarting, and whenever I would restart the system, it would require pulling the USB-C plug, replugging it back in, holding the button down, and originally without the RTC battery, it wasn't holding a charge, so the BIOS was resetting every time, and when it would reset, I would end up with my boot order being all funky. So replacing that battery out definitely helped with that. I was able to reset kind of the boot order, wanted it to boot from the NVMe drive first, where I had Clover installed, and then go from there. All right, any minute now. Oh, I guess another interesting tip when you install the Arduino environment in your Mac OS and Ubuntu. Windows comes with the Arduino package pre-installed, so that's not a worry. You may want to update it. You may want to update it either now or in the future. I didn't really check the version, so I can't tell you whether it's the most current or up-to-date version. You do want to set it. For my particular one went to COM5, and the Arduino, you want to set it to the Leonardo. It pulls up and defaults to the Arduino Genuino. You do want to set it to the Leonardo. Let's do this. Okay. You'll also notice that the red LED on digital pin 13 it comes on and then it turns off. Normally that red light will stay on. I guess it's programmed that way from the from DF Robot. However, one of the first things I did was went into the Arduino IDE and just made a quick sketch where I just turned the light off. And that just gives me another indicator whether at least the Arduino's working and whether it's set up and running. And all I really did was went into the setup, set pin 13 as an output, and set it to low just in the setup, and there's nothing running in the loop. So nothing really fancy going on there. In the future, what I may do is actually hook that over to the power switch, or try to jumper it in some way to just initialize or power it on right as I plug this thing in. Okay, so I showed you the Mac. Let's go into the Ubuntu and take a look. And Ubuntu, it is the latest. Didn't really require much fuss. It kind of just right out of the box, everything worked, which is the nice thing about Linux environments. They tend to be very stable, very fast, and very easy to set up nowadays. Ubuntu especially, super easy to set up, kind of super fun environment. You can see here, it is an Intel Core M3, 1 gigahertz, 4 cores, Intel HD graphics. Again, that's running 64 bits. And I have it on small partitions, so 62 gigs is all I really need. Memory, of course, you see is 7 and some change, 8 gigs basically. I do have a few things customized on here. Just gave it a nice theme. Made it very similar to the Mac OS by getting rid of the extension of the bar so it doesn't go left to right, or I guess top to bottom is what it defaults to. I set that to the bottom and had it just not stretch the whole screen. You can see the Arduino Ide is here, and give you a quick show of basically what happened here. So if you go into the tools, you go down to your board, you want to make sure you have Arduino Leonardo. And then you want to make sure that your port is set to, in this case, it's dev TTY ACM0. The nice thing with the chips that they've used, they do pop up with the name on there, so it does say Arduino Leonardo. So it's very hard to confuse which port it's running off of, but everything works and works well. And again, simple sketch just to turn that LED off is pin mode. We want to go 13, and we want to set that as output. And then we're going to go digital right. And same thing, we're going to do pin 13, and we're going to set that low. Boom. And you can compile it, send it up. I already have it kind of compiled and set up, but you can see very small, takes up very little space, 2 lines of code, and it turns off that LED and just gives you a little bit of an extra indicator of what's going on with your Lattepanda. Okay, so let's jump over. No, I'm not going to save that. Let's jump over to Windows, and again, Windows comes kind of pre-installed, so not much to it. You've probably, if you have the Lattepanda Alpha, you've probably seen it already. One of the things I haven't done yet is actually create a user for Windows and kind of change out a few things. I'd probably secure it a little bit better, throw some antivirus on there, as well as get rid of the Lattepanda username. I'm just not sure, who set that up, where it came from, and so because Windows 10 does have remote connections, my thinking is I would prefer just not to have a user set up on my machine that I don't know and don't really know. Eventually what I'll do is just go ahead and reinstall Windows over top of it, just get a fresh install, just to make sure that I know exactly what's in the system and where everything is. Of course, before I did that, I'd back up the drivers. I'm not sure if there are any specific drivers for the Alpha, or Windows drivers that are specific for the Alpha, but always a good idea to back up your drivers. I didn't create any files on there, so the need for backing up files and doing any sort of backup juggling or loop-de-loops, it's just not necessary. So that's definitely a priority before you get started, is just do a fresh install so that you have a clean, secure operating system from the start. Okay, plugged in, lights off, ready to go, powered on. And as you can see, that seems to be a common thread, is every time you shut down a system, rather than jumping back in and restarting into the bootloader, it seems to just kind of completely shut down. So what I've been doing is just unplugging the USB, replugging it back in, and turning it on. There's got to be a better way, and eventually I will find that better way, but right now I'm just kind of setting all the systems up and getting everything running. Eventually what this will be is this system will be my development environment. So I can make cross-platform apps for Windows, Linux, as well as Mac OS, which is nice. And then in Windows, of course, with Visual Studio, I can develop for Android, and then in Mac OS through Xcode, I could develop for iPads and iPhones and things like that. So definitely gives you a lot of flexibility as a developer. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. That was my primary driving reason for picking this device up. Now, interestingly enough, Novatech Spirit beat me to it. Love them. Awesome channel. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. Totally worth it. He's super smart, knows what he's doing, and he's just he's fun to watch, and not very bougie, if I could say that. So anyway, he beat me to installing the Mac OS on there, but the chipset, everything that was on this device was very similar to what comes on in that MacBook. So it was a very easy see that this could be a Mac device. So even without all the additional functionality, without Bluetooth, without wireless, dongles can be used for all that. So my main purpose was if I could get Mac on this device, and then Lattepanda or DF Robot already came out and said that they'll support Windows 10 as well as Linux, Ubuntu primarily, and a lot of people are using Ubuntu as their Linux daily driver. So that was my priority, is to get Ubuntu going. So you can see here we have everything running, working really, really well. You can see it is a Intel Core. It is the Lattepanda. Again, all this stuff is going to change. So if you're thinking of messing with product ID, all that other stuff, that's kind of OEM from Lattepanda. So it's not going to stay on here, but that is the system. That is the build. That's what we got going on here. Another thing to note that every environment has the Arduino IDE, so that the Atmel chip can be accessed from all of the systems. And all of them I've kind of pre-configured to Arduino Leonardo and COM5 or whichever COM TTY terminal display, whatever port they need to be set on. So all of them are set up, ready to go. All of them can work within work with their with all of their parts, with the exception of Mac OS. Mac OS does not support the Intel Wi-Fi chipset, so the Intel Wi-Fi won't work. However, the Intel Bluetooth will. I have found that the Intel Bluetooth is a little bit, again, a little bit buggy, and I'm not a fan of having the antennas, the little floppy sticker antennas sticking out of there, and the little connectors, the micro FL connectors. They're just they're really not robust enough for my taste. So with the addition of a hub, it's very easy to put as many dongles on as you'd want for things like Wi-Fi, things like Bluetooth. I tend to stick to Asus. Asus definitely is supported and works with Mac. It works with Linux, and it works with Windows. So again, I have my peripheral devices that'll work on all three operating systems. We have the Alpha, which supports all three systems. On the back here, you can see I have a Samsung 970 EVO M2 drive, and NVMe is just super fast, super comfy to work on. It kind of makes any device feel even speedier than it is, and that's really the bottleneck nowadays. If you don't have an NVMe drive, you're definitely running up against a wall when it comes to speed. So yeah, there we have it. Hope you liked it. I will give a few tips for the Mac OS install if you're following along with Novatech Spirit with Don's install. One of the things that you will run into on occasion there, because the Mac OS isn't pulling the time from the BIOS. What'll end up happening is when you burn your Mac OS installer on your drive, and you install it in, and you go through the boot process to install it, it's not going to allow you to install it. It might tell you that the installer is corrupt, or there's something wrong with the installer. And what that is the timestamp on that installer doesn't match the timestamp on your system. And since it doesn't pull from the BIOS, even if you have it updated in the BIOS, it's not going to pull that. It's not going to see that. So you will have to, in the installer, just go up to the top in your tools, pull down a terminal, and just simply type in date. And I believe the format of the date is 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 2-digit hour, 2-digit minute, and 4-digit year. So type that in, hit enter. That'll set the time. It'll give you that time back or right in the terminal. Close out that terminal, then go do the install. And you don't even need to reboot between. Just hit the install Mac OS, and all of a sudden it won't be corrupt anymore, or it'll all of a sudden work. So definitely worth the tip there. It did stumble me or catch me a few times when I was going through and installing it. I did install a few different versions before I decided I'd just deal with some of the issues with Mac Mojave. Mojave, since it's still new, there's still some issues here and there. I kind of like to think of it as it's still a little beta, although Apple probably never admit to that. You can go High Sierra, which is definitely a lot more stable, especially now. If you could still get it from the Mac store by the time you see this video. So those are just a few tips. Also with the bootloaders, you do want to make sure that you're partitioning your drives. Now, if you're using APFS in the Apple system, that's really, really nice. What Apple's system will do is actually expand and use up your drive as you need it. So the space actually looks like it's free in a certain sense, and it looks like it's the full drive in another sense. So it's got that expandable capability. What I did was I went in there and just partitioned off a separate FAT32 drive while I was in Mac OS, and then when I booted into the installer, I went ahead and deleted that, and that was just a way for me to know, or an indicator for me, that this was the drive I wanted to install on, because I didn't want to wipe out the Mac OS or anything else. If you leave the Windows on the eMMC drive, then that one's going to be very easy to identify. But if your NVMe has two different systems running on it, then you're going to want to be able to identify which one of those drives you partitioned off you're going to install your Ubuntu on. And I just found that's the easiest way for me. I set it up as a FAT32 on my NVMe, and it's the only FAT32 on the NVMe. So I know easily that's my drive. That's where I want to drop it. I delete that drive off, make a new one in the ext4 format. And in my case, I didn't actually make up another swap drive for it, but that's another thing you could do. You could make a swap drive as well, and just kind of create another partition there for your swap. With 8 gigs of memory, I don't foresee myself hitting the swap drive too often. But yeah, everything runs well. It's a solid machine. I've had it up and running for a couple days on end in each one of the operating systems, and they seem to all be very stable and work very well. The alpha does get pretty hot, and I think that heat does contribute to some issues with the BIOS and with the restarts. So what I found is on occasion, if I need to reset and get into another operating system, and I'm having some issues, I'll unplug it, give it a few minutes, and then come back to it. Literally few minutes. By few minutes, I mean like 1-2 at most. And the thing's cooled down enough where when I restarted, I could get back into the bootloader and get to work. So there we have it. Thank you for watching. If you stuck with me, appreciate it. Again, love to give a big shout out to Don over at Nova Tech Spirit. Check out his YouTube. It's definitely worth it, especially if you're a tinkerer, especially if you're into messing with single board computers. Okay, bye.